What's up guys, Matt with BleepinJeep. In the last video I showed you how to dovetail, dove nose, whatever you want to call it, to the Comanche. In this video we still have a lot of work to do to get this thing up and running, so let's continue. So after that last video, I decided to change things up a little bit. I wasn't happy with the way that I had this set up. So I was going to make a bar out front here, and I had that little thin piece holding the radiator and everything. But I wasn't happy with that. It wasn't up to the quality that I wanted, and it didn't feel heavy duty enough. It probably would have worked. But what I've done now, I've decided that I didn't really like the look of having a bar out front here, and I liked the way it was. So I decided to take and put a bar on the inside. With everything held in place, it actually fits perfectly right behind here. So the bar is a little smaller though, it's 1.5 inches. And I used that to not only hold the radiator, but also to hold this front grille. So now it's kind of all in one. Everything looks good. It's hidden, it's strong, it's beefy, it's tidy, and I think it just looks better and functions better overall. So I think the next logical order of operations here is to think about the shock mount. I need to move the bottom end out on the axle because it's just too close to this bar right here. I need to make the shock hoop, and then I need to consider having a tie-in to the other side of the shock hoop. If I ever wanted to do a 3-link or 4-link in the future, I would need to have some sort of springs here, like a coilover or an ORI. And to do that, it would need to be very sturdy to hold the weight of the vehicle. So for that reason, I'd want to come across with this tube, and to do that, you can use these little guys here. And it's basically a mount so that you can disconnect that bar if you ever wanted to change the motor or pull the motor out. That way you don't have to cut and re-weld the tube. You just weld these in there and then that bar pulls out. Another consideration I need to have is where I'm going to mount the computer and the intake. So if I mount these shock hoops up in here and don't think about that in advance, I might screw myself in the long run and not have any place to route the intake or to mount the computer box or all the rest of the wiring and other crap that goes in here. As it is right now, my shocks are kind of mounted parallel to the axle and beside the axle instead of on top of it. And I want to move that mount up to the top out further here, and I probably need to make it perpendicular to the axle. Let me show you on the rear. On the rear, it's set up correctly. You can see that the mount is perpendicular to the axle on top and bottom. And the reason that's correct is because your axle, when it droops, it should only move this way and this way, right? Because that's the way it flexes. And having it mounted like that will keep it from binding. If you think about having this mounted the other direction, perpendicular, or parallel actually, if the bolt is parallel to the axle tube, that means the mount will bind whenever it flexes this way. It'll bind up. Same thing with the top. Now this front axle was set up like this when I first bought it. Now the reasoning that they have it set up like that is because of axle wrap. So axle wrap is when these leaf springs bend, that axle is gonna go like this basically and be all over the place. But you shouldn't really have axle wrap, so I need to address the axle wrap in another way, maybe a ladder bar or something like that to keep that axle from wrapping so bad if I'm going to continue to use the leaf springs. best things about removing the fender wells here is that I have a lot better access to the spark plug wires and the spark plugs. My biggest problem with this Jeep is that the spark plug wires are so close to the headers. It's just impossible to keep them from melting. And I've just about tried everything, including these little guys here. But you can see where it's white, that's where it's still touching, and it still burns through. It's like a Chinese finger trap. This one isn't burned through yet to the rubber, but in the past I've had these burn right through that and melt the rubber. And the problem with these little fiberglass shields is that I can't see when it's melted through the rubber, so it just gives me no visual way to determine what's going on in there. So I picked these up on Amazon, and I was gonna put these over like this, which I could do, but I'm almost tempted just to run it without these. And that way, if it does melt or does touch or something weird is going on in there, at least I'll be able to see what's happening without pulling everything apart. I say that, but still, look how close the rubber is, even with that metal shield on there. Maybe I ought to run both. Holy cow. How are you supposed to do this without melting these things? Let's see what this back one looks like. It too is very close. Dang, everything is just so close in there. Okay, here's a look. I guess I'm gonna leave those boots on the last two, because there's pretty much no other way to keep the rubber from touching than to have those isolators on there. And as far as these things go, you can buy them separately on Amazon, but it was only like $10 or $15 more to get all of the spark plug wires as well, so keep that in mind. And you can take these off and put them on any spark plug wires. Here's an example of one on the passenger side. Even though it was covered by this fiberglass sock, it's still melted right through that, and you can see once it gets through there, it's gonna be no good. Look how brittle and nasty that is. All right, check that out. I've got all the spark plug wires fixed now. The rear two still had to have those boots, but there is more separation. I moved the steering over. So before, the steering was out here, and whenever I pulled it off, I twisted this in. I've got a heim joint kind of holding the center section. I twisted that in about ½ inch that way or so, and now it's not rubbing on the spark plug wires like it was before. That was a problem that I had, but the main problem I had was just them melting through, so hopefully all that helps. And I've got a lot more access now for cooling, one, and also I can see a lot better in here now, whereas before I had to dig through all of this to be able to get to the spark plug wires. Much better access now. The passenger side is pretty much the same story. Those two in the back, there's just no way to keep those from touching the headers. The wire's not touching, but that loom is touching. But this one too, it's just so tight up in there. If you have any ideas or suggestions, let me know. Maybe they make a spark plug that has a 90-degree on this end, which would help. A spark plug boot, that is, not the spark plug, but the wire. If it had a 90-degree, I could come in here and push it on, and it wouldn't have to sit up against the header there. While I was in there, I also tightened down all of the bolts. They were very loose, and one of them was missing, so I replaced those. Next up, I've moved the winch back a little bit because this is the cooler that I've got for the power steering, and I plan on putting this right here, well, on the opposite side, so underneath the bumper, but right here under the bumper. So what I want to do is, I've got a transfer punch, and if you haven't seen those, they are punches that come in all different sizes, and it basically centers your punch in the hole so that you don't get off. So I'm going to transfer punch these 4 holes, then I'll drill and tap it, and I'll bolt this on the underside. Alright, the rain is really coming down good out there now. Hello! Alright, so now I've got the grinding done. I saved you the ear cancer of all that because whoo, that was just like an hour of sitting there with the grinder, removing those tabs and brackets. What I need to do now is make the tabs for the shock down here. And I need to make the hoop. Part of the problem I'm having, and the reason the hoop is taking me so long, is I also need to fit an air filter in here somewhere. There's just not a lot of room anymore for an air filter, a radiator, an engine, and all the other goodies that have to fit in here. So I'm thinking that the air filter will fit kind of right here. There's not a lot of options either for a 4-inch diameter hole on an air filter. But I think I'll fit it right about there somewhere, and if with any luck we'll be able to fit the shock hoop in here as well. So what I'm going to do now is some CAD design, cardboard aided design. I'm going to put this template here and push it over right on the axle where I want the bracket to be, and this is going to give me an idea of how to cut my cardboard. Now I'll use that to draw some sort of a mount for my shock tabs. And keeping in mind that your shock needs to sit here and have clearance on the bottom and the top. So maybe we'll put the hole right about there. Does that look good? Something like that. Now I'll take my scissors, cut that out. Make sure it fits on the axle first, and then we can either use cardboard or we can just go straight to metal if I think it's going to be perfect. Okay, I made some final adjustments over there on the axle. Now I need to cut this out. I need 4 of them, so we'll just lay them along a 1/4-inch plate of steel here, and I will just trace them, and then we'll cut them out with the plasma torch. Ta-da! Check that out. That looks pretty good. Now I just need to figure out the angle that it should be and then tack it. So by the angle I need to figure out kind of between the way the knuckle turns back and forth. Right now I've got it all the way to the right and then all the way to the left. It's going to be really close either way to the shock. But I think it's going to be right about there. Oh no, my ground clamp popped off. Okay, let me turn the wheel and we'll see what it looks like. All right, I think that's about good. Still don't know where that shock will be, whether it'll be at an angle like this or angle like this, but either way, I think we'll have just enough clearance there. You got to remember this axle flexes like this, and when it comes up like this, it's basically gonna bring the shock out. So if anything, I might have to cut down the threads there, cut down that bolt a little bit, but it should be pretty good right there. It's kind of hard to see all black on black on black, but from the side, this is what it looks like. It's kind of angled back a little bit. Hopefully that'll be far enough back that I can still fit my air filter right in here somewhere. And it should be in a pretty good spot for the cross brace that has to go up and over the engine. So let's tack the other side on and then we'll work on the hoops. Before we can get the other side at the same angle, we'll need to know the angle. So that's where our angle finder comes in. We're right at about 75 degrees. It's either that or measure off the firewall or something. Either one will probably do. There's a little bit of give and take there as well. So another cool thing about what I'm doing here is future progression. The way I'm thinking about this and the way I'm building these shock towers is in case I wanted to go to an ORI or a coilover in the future. I'm setting it up so that it'll work for both. So right now this is a 14-inch travel shock, which means this will travel 14 inches. Right now I've got it set up right in the middle at 7 inches. And that's the same thing you'd want to do with an ORI or a coilover. So with that being said, the only thing you want to do when you're supporting the weight of the vehicle like you would on a coilover, you want to make the hoops much stronger and the mounts much stronger, because now you're not just taking shock load, but you're also taking the entire weight of the vehicle. And with that being said, I was gonna bend some shock hoops, but I completely forgot that I only have a 90-degree die for the 1 3/4 tubing. I've got a 180 die for 1.5 if I wanted to do 1.5, but I really think I probably ought to use 1 3/4. So I think I'll just buy some shock hoops because these dies are really expensive. I don't really use it that often, and shock hoops aren't going to cost that much in 1 3/4. I guess that's what I did with these. I must have bought these and forgotten that I did so. But these are too short now to reuse because I need them to be quite a bit longer. So in that case, I guess that's where this one ends. In the next video, I hope to finish up the shock hoop, mount the new shocks, button up the front end, including figuring out where to put this filter, put the radiator back in, and then we'll make the brace that goes atop the across the top of the engine. All that coming up. Make sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Click that little bell as well, and we'll see you in the next video.